Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the Yes You Coaching podcast. I'm your host, Anna Manning. I am a confidence coach and I'm here to talk to you today about speaking up. So there's loads of evidence that women's voices are heard less than men's voices in the world of work. And it's a topic that I find myself coaching on again and again and again. So I know it's something that people need help with. And when I was researching for this podcast, I came across this quote from a woman called Nicola Mendelsohn. Now, when she made this quote, she was Facebook's vice president for Europe, the Middle East and Africa. And she's now vice president of their global business group, right? She's been described as the most powerful British woman in the tech industry. So think she's pretty high up. But she says, I remember the early days in my career that sometimes I would have a thought in my head, but I lacked the confidence to be able to get that thought out. How many people would say the same thing? How many times do you have a thought, an idea, a suggestion, but it stays in your head? You don't quite manage to get it out. Perhaps you don't quite have the confidence to get it out. This is one of the things that I coach on all the time. So I know that it is possible to go from being somebody who feels like they kind of put themselves on mute really, really regularly, who has loads of ideas and insights and knowledge to share, but they find it really difficult to get that out in, say, a meeting or a conversation, but that they can become someone who does manage to do that, that they can change that pattern and become someone who does speak up when they've got something to say and who feels all right about it. And that's why I want to share this with you, because if you're one of those people that is keeping quiet, I wholeheartedly believe the world needs to hear your voice. Women have been quieted for centuries. Now, finally, we are reaching the positions in the kind of corporate world, right, and in the business world that we have always been deserving of. Starting to. We're taking up those formal positions. But we're doing that with all this all these thousands of years behind us where women were kept quiet. Well, not on my watch. Join me in raising your voice, speaking up. That is everything we're going to talk about on the podcast today. So, women often tell me when I'm coaching that they can't find the right point to interject, and then they've lost the moment. They often tell me that they've got more to say than they actually say. And even, I've heard this one a few times, even when they're pretty sure that someone that's speaking up is actually wrong, they don't quite dare come in and contradict them. They also tell me really frequently that they worry about sounding or looking stupid. So today we're going to think about what it takes to speak up. What is happening for you if you're not speaking up all the times that you want to? So the first question that I have is, where do you not speak up? What are the circumstances? You want to become aware of them if you're going to change it. So is it big meetings for you? Is it when you're talking to senior people? Is it when you're in rooms with people you don't know as well? Where and when are those times when you have something to say, you know you have something to say, but you're not saying it? Once you've identified those, I want to help you to understand what is actually happening in those moments where you're not speaking up. In those moments where you've got something to say, you want to say it, but you can't quite get it out of your mouth. What exactly is happening? So I'm going to give you the example of that a client gave me recently. So they're in a meeting, They are quite a senior person in their own right, but they've recently been promoted. And they're in a meeting with a lot of other senior people, right? The senior leadership team. And they didn't really agree with the direction a conversation was going. They had an insight which they thought might actually really help this group of people to reframe the discussion. But their thought was, oh God, they're all going to disagree with me. As soon as they thought that, they felt, how they described it, kind of nervous, worried, slightly anxious. And the result of that was that they just kept the thought in their head. They didn't let it out of their mouth. And the result of that for the meeting was that they went ahead and made a decision without the benefit of this person's input, which she thought would probably have been really useful. And this is probably what's happening for everyone who's not speaking up. So there's a couple of options, right? One of the options is that actually you're keeping quiet because you're actually in a setting where it is unsafe for you to speak. So imagine that you're in an environment where you're trying to hide from somebody. In that moment, you are probably unsafe to speak, right? It is safer for you to kind of stay hidden and not speak, because speaking exposes you to risk and danger. Now, most of us at work, most of us are not in the situation where we're actually in danger, but that might be the way that our brains are perceiving it. So, for instance, if you're in a meeting and your thought is something like, I'm going to sound stupid here, everybody's going to look at me, people will think I don't know what I'm talking about, I haven't got anything of value to add, that creates a feeling of fear, anxiety, something like that. And once that fear and that anxiety is created, that makes it harder for you to open your mouth and to speak confidently. Now, if anybody was in that meeting that you're in, thinking and believing what you're thinking and believing, like, I'm going to sound stupid, I haven't got anything good to add, what are they going to think of me? Anyone who was thinking and believing that would be feeling the way you're feeling. And most of them wouldn't make a suggestion or a contribution either. But the problem that leaves you with is that you're probably getting frustrated. Most of the people that I coach on this tell me that afterwards they get really annoyed that they didn't manage to share their idea or their suggestion. They didn't manage to speak up. And they also tell me that they can often beat themselves up afterwards when they don't manage to share. So what it's really important to do as a first step is to recognise where you aren't speaking up, and then what is going on in your head which is stopping you from speaking up. So what is going through your mind in those moments right before you don't speak up? What is that for you? And if it's something like, I'm going to sound stupid, really just like, you really want to question that. Is it true that you're going to sound stupid if you make your point or your suggestion? Do you usually sound stupid when you make a point or a suggestion? I'm guessing you probably don't. So our brains can go a little bit on overdrive with speaking up, and they're really hyper-vigilant. And that's what's happening here. Your brain is like becoming hyper-vigilant to make sure that you avoid any potential scenario that it considers to be dangerous. And your brain, God bless it, considers a situation where you might expose yourself to, other people's opinions, or people thinking you're stupid, or you beating yourself up afterwards because you didn't quite make the point in the way you wanted. Your brain perceives all of that as dangerous. So it would rather that you stayed hidden, that you stayed small, and that you didn't put your head above the parapet. So these are the situations where you really want to, like, rather than kind of just let your brain run away with it, you really would just want to take a bit of time out and think, okay, are these fears that my brain has got, are they founded? Because what you'll find when you do that is probably a lot of them, actually, you might be overthinking it. It might not be as bad as you think, and it's always worth exploring. So that's a bit about how and why most people aren't speaking up when they've got something to share. What I'm going to go on to now is 5 top tips that I have to help you start speaking up when you want to. And the first one we've touched on a little bit already. It's to know what you are thinking. When you're taking a particular action, like speaking up or staying quiet, that is being driven by how you feel. And the way you feel is being driven by what you're thinking about the scenario. So if you're thinking, it's really not a good idea for me to make a comment here, you're feeling anxious, you're not going to make a comment. So work out what that is for you. What is it that you hear your brain say in those moments? You really want to get clear on that. It's like the first bit of investigative work that you need to do in order to work out how you're going to speak up more. The second tip is don't believe everything that you think. So most of us just assume that any thought that our brain comes out with is true. Anything that appears in the screen of our mind, we're like, well, yeah, I'm just going to assume that that's right. I'm going to believe it. But that is a dangerous game. A lot of the thoughts that your brain comes out with are distortions at best and downright myths at worst. So it's not always, your brain is like, it's like not always a good judge. And it will generate thoughts that just appear in your head like you're going to sound stupid in order to stop you from doing something which it perceives to be dangerous. But if you really look at that, if you don't automatically assume your brain is right, so your brain's like, you're going to look stupid. It's like, okay, let's take a pause. Am I actually going to look stupid if I suggest this idea? What are the chances that I am going to look stupid? Have I looked stupid in the past? Do I normally look stupid? Do I know about this area? Or is this just a clarifying question? Do people get judged in my organisation for quote unquote looking stupid? And if you think, nah, actually, it gives you some reality check. Like it gives you a little bit of distance from what it is that you're thinking and believing in the moment. And what you might want to do if you really want to go into this is look at the top kind of 3 thoughts that your brain likes to throw at you every time when you want to speak up and you don't, and really just test those one by one. Are they actually true? Would somebody else agree with them? Like one of your colleagues who knows you really well, would they say, your brain's right on that one? Or would they be like, well, you usually make really valid comments, so I don't think you would really sound stupid. So don't believe everything you think. And remember, maybe not in the moment, but maybe after the event, test those thoughts that your brain comes out with to just see, do they stand up to scrutiny or not? My third tip is to use courage when you don't have confidence. So I'm a confidence coach, right? I help people to feel more confident at work. But if you're doing something new, or if you're doing something which is a bit unfamiliar to you, like speaking up in a senior meeting where ordinarily you might stay quiet, it's very difficult to be confident in that scenario. What you could try instead was not waiting to feel confident to do the thing you want to do, not waiting till you feel confident to speak, but instead using your courage. So I'm guessing there's loads of stuff you've done in your life where you didn't really feel that confident, but you used your courage instead. I was thinking about a time, twice actually. I think, now thinking back on it, I think I must have been a bit crazy. But I was doing a flying trapeze and I was terrified. I was like so far from confident, it was unbelievable. But I used my courage in that moment to do it. And another example that I've kind of talked about on my email, with my email community before, and by the way, if you don't get my emails, then go to www.yesyoucoaching.com and join the community. I send out emails every Sunday and they're like confidence coaching, like direct to your inbox. They're great. But yeah, I talked about this scenario where I was in a conference room full of people, it was like 300 people in the room, and the guy on stage was like actively lying, and I knew he was lying, and I was like, I bet he knows he's lying as well. But everyone was believing him, and I thought, I can't just let him get away with this. And I was terrified. There were like questions from the floor. I stuck my hand up. My face was red. I was shaking. My voice was shaking. I was sweating. But I took the microphone and said, I had a discussion with X person that you're talking about very recently, and I can confirm that is the actual opposite of what they meant, of what they actually have been saying. This is what they have been saying. And people were looking at me aghast because I was disagreeing with this guy that was on the stage. Now, I didn't feel confident in that scenario at all. But instead, I used my courage and I relied on my courage in that moment. And I spoke even though my voice was shaking. You can do the same thing. When you don't have your confidence, use your courage instead. Tip number 4 is don't beat yourself up. So what a lot of people find is that in the moment, their brain will say to them, oh, you're going to sound stupid, don't speak. But in moments where they do speak, they then experience beating themselves up afterwards. So they come out of the meeting and their brain will be going over and over it like, oh my God, why did you say that? You're such an idiot. Everybody's going to think you're a fool. They're going to think you're rubbish at your job. You're never going to get a promotion, blah, 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 blah. If any of that sounds familiar to you, then it is going to be really difficult for you to speak up, because subconsciously, even if you're not aware of it in the moment, you know what's waiting for you at the end of that meeting. And it is being mentally beaten up by yourself for anything which you don't deem to be perfect. So almost going into the speaking up situation, you're creating a lot of pressure. You know that if you get the slightest thing wrong, or maybe even if you do get everything perfect, you're going to beat yourself up afterwards. And it creates like a vicious cycle of pressure, stress, not speaking up and beating yourself up, or managing to speak up and then beating yourself up afterwards, which makes you less likely to do it again. Your brain is going to perceive that it's even more dangerous if it knows that it's going to get beaten up afterwards. I know this is a kind of weird, fucked up circle because it's you that's doing it, but most of the time we're not aware that that's the vicious cycle is being created within our own brain. So, if you're going to go into a meeting where you're going to be challenging yourself to speak up, or you're going to be in an environment where you're going to be challenging yourself to speak up, you can make it easier for yourself by saying, okay, Anna, I know you want to speak up in this meeting, and I promise that if you do that, there is no way I'm going to criticise you afterwards. I will not beat you up. I will not ridicule you. I will be proud of you for anything that you manage to say. I will be proud of you for speaking up. How much easier would it be to actually speak up if you know that there is like psychological safety inside your own self? We know that it's really hard for people to speak up in an environment which is like what we call a toxic work environment, right? So if you are beating yourself up, you are creating like a toxic work environment inside your own head. So that makes it a lot harder for you to speak up. So if that's you and you can identify, oh yeah, actually I do quite a lot of beating myself up, that's something you're going to need to work on in order to speak up more frequently. So the last tip I have for you, tip 5, is to create a challenge for yourself. So when I'm working with clients, I sometimes, if they're working on a goal like this, they want to speak up more. In order to help them to focus on it and to use their courage and to kind of just really go outside their comfort zone, I ask them to create a challenge. So they can choose what that is. You can choose what this is. And it kind of depends how many opportunities you're going to get to practice within your normal day-to-day work. So decide how many times in the next week or the next 5 working days or the next month you want to speak up when you've got something to share. Choose, right? So you know what the goal is, you know what you're aiming for. What that will do is it will direct your brain to show you moments where it will be like, oh, you could speak up here. We could get a gold star on the challenge chart. So you're kind of creating a friend out of your brain here rather than an enemy. Plus, it will help you to focus on it, and it will have the added benefit of you giving yourself like a gold star, even if it's a metaphorical gold star. But you know what? Make it a literal one. Actually stick a chart on the wall and stick some gold stars on it. We're all essentially like a 5-year-old inside. And what that does is it gives you a dopamine hit, which you enjoy because it feels nice. So you're more likely to do it again and get another gold star and then another one. And what happens when you start building this skill of speaking up more and more often? You create confidence. You realise that, you don't sound stupid and you do have interesting things to share and you can get involved with the discussion. The more you do it, the safer you will feel, the more likely you are to do it, till it comes to a point where you just don't really have to focus on it anymore because it feels kind of natural and kind of easy and it's just the way you do things now. So create yourself a challenge, decide how many times you're going to speak up today or this week or this month, and I really encourage you, like, stick a chart on the wall. I don't care if anyone thinks you're stupid. If you really don't want anyone to see it, put it on your phone, put it in your jewellery box, do whatever. But honestly, it works because it gives you dopamine and it allows you to see your progress. And also, make sure that you're like congratulating yourself when you're doing this. Our brains like to be rewarded and we like to be acknowledged, but most of the time we don't really acknowledge ourselves. So I've got clients who, they start speaking up in meetings finally, and all they can tell me is, well, I should have been doing this years ago. And, oh, but there was one occasion where I didn't speak up. And it's like, come on, let's at least acknowledge the progress that you have made. That's going to be, you're going to be more likely to make more progress if you acknowledge the progress that you've already made. Think about it. If you're in a team where your boss is like, yeah, well done today, you did a really good job making that point in that meeting, you're more likely to do it again. So be the boss in your own brain and do that for yourself. There's just a couple of other thoughts that I want to leave you with. And the first one is around our use of, I'm sure there is like a proper official way of saying this, but it's like qualifying language, I would call it. So it might be saying something like, oh, well, this might be a stupid question, but, or you might already have thought of this, but, or apologising for making a suggestion or a comment. If that's something you do, the research suggests that it weakens the strength of your point. And I'm sure that you are making a perfectly legitimate and smart point for which you do not need to apologise. You do not need to qualify. So I'm going to encourage you to just drop that language from your vocabulary. Just make the point. Just ask the question. See what happens. Another final thought is around interruptions. So I was looking at the research before this, and it suggests that women get interrupted more than men. If you see this happening in meetings, or just become aware of it, just notice. But how about helping each other to speak up as well? So if there's another woman in the meeting and you notice that she's being interrupted, you might say, can I just hold you there, Simon? I really wanted to hear what Sarah had to say. Right? Then Sarah has the floor again. Next, if you hear somebody repackaging an idea or a suggestion that somebody else has shared, this happens all the time, and my clients tell me this all the time. They'll say, I made a point and then it didn't really gain any traction, and then 3 minutes later Tom said it, and suddenly everyone was like, great point, Tom. If you notice that happening, could you use your courage and say, do you know, I think Sarah came up with that point a minute ago. That, right? Now that's going to take a bit of courage, but there are ways that we can raise our own voices, and there are ways that we can help each other to raise our voices too. If you know of anybody who could benefit from listening to this episode, please send it on to them. And if you would like to work with me to increase your confidence at work and start speaking up, consider joining my Confident at Work. It's the coaching and training program for women who want to start raising their voices, raising their confidence in their workplace. The next round starts in September 22, and we're going to be booking for it in June. So if you're someone that wants to speak up more and to increase your confidence, your presence, your influence, consider joining us. All the details are on the website. So until the next episode, my dear loves, I hope you will use your voices, set yourself a challenge. Find me on social media, let me know how it goes. All right, have a good week. Bye.